All right, well, it's good to be with you tonight. If you want to open up your Bibles, we're going to be looking at Jonah this evening. So, Jonah is such an interesting guy. If I'm certain that most of you have, read through the prophet Jonah, and it's kind of a strange book. It's kind of short, and the guy is just. I've been, just thinking about him, and he's a little bit of a confusing person, at least for me. To be honest, he's a little bit of a, when I read about his life and the short, kind of story we have here, I get a little frustrated with him, and I think, Jonah, what is your deal? It starts out, and he just kind of ignores God, and then seems like he kind of gets back on track, after he spends some time in the belly of the fish there. And then, he sees God do something great, and then it's like he totally misses it, and I read that, and I just think, man, Jonah, what is your deal? Like, what is wrong with you? But, the more I've kind of thought about Jonah and kind of read and meditated on, the account we have recorded here, to be honest, the more I kind of identify with Jonah, and maybe the frustration, that I feel towards Jonah is there because I kind of see it in my own life, and I think, man, I think I wouldn't, admit this very often to myself, but really, I kind of maybe act like a Jonah more often than I would like to, to think. And so, we're going to go through, the whole book, not verse by verse. So don't worry, we're not going to be here all evening. I don't talk as much as Rich does, so it'll be a little shorter tonight. But there's just a few kind of high points that I want to hit on as we go through this this story of Jonah. So let's go ahead and read here in chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, 'Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me.' But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and he went down to Joppa and found a ship, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord." Now, we don't really know a lot about Jonah, okay? He doesn't really write much about himself, as far as kind of, a lot of background information in this prophecy. He doesn't mention, any of the ministry that he was involved in as a prophet, here in this book. But we read in 2 Kings, chapter 14, verses 24 and 25, in the 15th year of Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, began to reign in Samaria, and he reigned for 41 years. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from all the sins of Jeroboam, the father of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. He restored the border of Israel from Lebo Hamath as far as the sea of Arabah, according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, which he spoke by his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet, who was from Gath Hepher. So this is really the only information we have about Jonah, as far as where he was from and his prophecies. Because if you look in the story of Jonah, he didn't really give a prophecy. In fact, the only prediction that he made was against the city, and it didn't come to pass, so he wasn't a very good prophet. But here it says that, he had prophesied that during the reign of Jeroboam, that Israel would actually expand. Now, you would remember that during this time, Israel, the northern kingdom, had turned away from God. They had set up the golden calves in the north, and they were, as a nation, they were worshiping idols, and they had turned from God. Jonah, though, is up there in the north. This area that is mentioned is in kind of the Galilee region, and he gives a prophecy that God is actually going to bless Israel, even though their king is doing evil in the sight of the Lord, and he's going to expand their borders. So they're going to win back some of the territory that had been lost. Israel had been fighting off the enemies that had been attacking from the north and from the what's that side, the east, and they had lost a lot of their territory. But Jonah had prophesied that, no, God's going to restore that. So if you think about it, Jonah was actually kind of a probably popular prophet, with the nation of Israel. He brought, instead of, you read some of the other prophecies, like maybe Isaiah and particularly Jeremiah, and he's speaking these prophecies, and they're kind of, prophecies of like judgment, right, against the nation. But Jonah, he was kind of lucky, he said, I have a good, kind of prediction for you guys. God's going to give us back some of the territory that we've lost to our enemies. So everybody likes someone like that. Anybody that has something nice to say, right? They appreciate that. Someone often, even in our own lives, someone who has like a cutting, maybe true word to say to us, a word of correction, it's kind of hard to receive sometimes, right? And I mean, as we mature as believers, hopefully we learn to receive those things. But, someone that brings a word of encouragement, I mean, we're like, yeah, bring some more of that, anything else, nice you want to say? And, we can, it kind of makes us like the person more, right? But I think Jonah was kind of like that. He was enjoying a popular ministry. He was giving, a prophecy that came to pass, so people respected his ministry. They respected him. They received him as a prophet. And I think that he was pretty happy, pretty comfortable, pretty content with where he was and what God was doing, in the nation and through him. But here in Jonah, what does it say? All of a sudden, God says, "Arise, go to Nineveh." God kind of just comes in and just, bam, he interrupts Jonah's life. He kind of ruins it all for Jonah, right? He's enjoying this ministry. He's enjoying the popularity of being, a prophet up there in the north. And then all of a sudden God says, no, I want you to leave all this, and I want you to go to Nineveh. And it's interesting, that oftentimes when God interrupts our life, he interrupts what, we are comfortable with, what we're content with. Oftentimes we see that, our comfort or maybe our contentment is more important than our obedience, to God. And sometimes we realize, too, that our obedience is a little bit more conditional than we thought it was. Right? Isn't it kind of easy to walk with the Lord and serve the Lord when it's our way and in kind of our own comfort zone? It's like, Lord, yeah, I'll serve you, and I can kind of do this and that, but if you want me to do that, well, I don't know. As long as it's in our comfort zone, we'll do it, usually, But sometimes when God calls us outside of the comfort zone, and I hear people sometimes, they almost, God gives us gifts, and, he gives us certain personalities, of course, and, the giftings maybe allow us to minister in certain circumstances and in certain ways more effectively. But you know what? God, he can call us to minister outside of our giftings. And sometimes we use that as a little bit of an excuse, right? Well, I'm not really gifted in that way, so, I'm not going to do that. When sometimes it's just because we don't want to get out of our comfort zone. I think that we kind of see that with Jonah. But I love, that God, he interrupts his life and he says, get up, right? Arise, go. And, This has been God's constant call to believers since the beginning of time. Go. Right? Jesus made it very, very clear, right, before he ascended with what we call the Great Commission. He said, go, right? Go into all the nations. And you know what? This is throughout the history of the church, throughout the history of the nation of Israel, this has always been a stumbling point and a challenge, is there's an unwillingness to go, okay? Now, I have the privilege of serving. I'm an American. I was born in America, but God has called me to what for me is a foreign country, a foreign land. And I have that, that privilege. I consider it a privilege. He's called me to go there, to Jordan. Does God call all of us to go, to Jordan, to go to foreign lands? No. I think that we can be in complete, submission and walking in obedience to God, serving in our own country, right? But we're still called to go. Sometimes the calling to go is not just going to a foreign country, a foreign nation. But sometimes it can be stepping outside of our comforts, going to our neighbor, maybe going to that part of the city that, we don't particularly like, or going to a certain, group of people that, live a certain kind of lifestyle that we don't agree with, like that can be the call to go. And God is constantly calling us to go. That's God's heart. That's what, we would call God's missionary heart. What did how did God demonstrate that? He went. He left heaven and he came. He's the one who gave us the whole example of going. He left and he came, to humanity, to mankind, so that we might be saved. And you know what? Nothing is more disturbing to a comfortable faith, right? Or maybe a kind of an unhealthy contentment or a comfortable church than God's passion for the world. It makes us uncomfortable, right? It makes me uncomfortable. The places that God maybe calls me sometimes, the people that God calls me to reach out to, the people that God calls us to, the lost. Often we pick and choose who we'll reach out to, right? Who we'll show mercy to, who we'll, talk with and share Jesus with. But, God, no. His passion is for the world, for the lost, for each person. I love in Mark, how the Great Commission, it says to every creature. He makes it very, very clear, it's each person that he's called us to go to. Here, Jonah, of course, is kind of a little bit of a negative example of not being willing to go. So, living with God's heart to reach the world, guess what? It's oftentimes it will make our struggle greater instead of making our struggle in life easier. Why? Because the struggle often is with ourselves. Our hearts are hard. Our hearts are... I'll just talk about myself because I don't know you guys very well. It's my first day with you. So, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. My heart is selfish. I think about my own comfort. I think about my own conveniences, And so God's call to go to all people, I can struggle with that because it puts me out of my comfort zone. It makes me uncomfortable, and I do things that I wouldn't normally do. He calls me to maybe do things that I'm not necessarily gifted in, right? But it's for the sake of reaching the lost, And, God is always constantly, just like with Jonah, pushing us out of our comfort zone. And oftentimes, as we're pushed out of our comfort zone, we very, very quickly see the limited, reservoirs of mercy and grace that maybe we think, oh yeah, I love everybody, and oh yeah, I can show God's grace, and I understand God's mercy and grace, but that's when we're in our comfort zone. But like Jonah, when God calls us to get out of that, we very quickly can see, wait a second, I guess I'm not as merciful as I thought I was. I'm not as full of love and grace as I thought I was. But what did God say? He said, go to Nineveh. that great city. Now, Nineveh, of course, was the, kind of the capital of the Assyrian Empire at the time. And this, at that time, was one of Israel's, principal enemies. They were the ones that were coming in from the east, and they were attacking the northern kingdom. And so this was Israel's enemy. And God, he calls Jonah to go there. If you have ever read Nahum, the prophet, his prophecies are against Nineveh. Nahum actually, he lived in a town called Al-Kosh, which it's on a mountain, kind of a mountainside that looks down into the valley. We call it the Nineveh Plains, and it looks into the area where the city of Nineveh was, which today is modern-day Mosul, if you've ever heard of that city. 2 years ago, ISIS came and they completely took Mosul, and they killed many, many Christians, and people, had to flee the city. And we actually arrived in Iraq just a couple weeks, actually maybe a week, I don't know, maybe a week after ISIS took the city. So we met many, many of these people that were fleeing for their lives. And there's actually a tomb. The tomb of Nahum is actually on this mountain. And I was able to go and see that. But Nahum, in chapter 3, he says, "Woe to the bloody city, all full of lies and plunder, who has no end to their prey." So this is kind of Nahum's kind of maybe, summary of the city. It's a bloody city. They prey on everybody, and it's just full of lies. Nineveh was not a nice place to go. I don't know, think of maybe the worst city that you can think of today in the world. What city comes to mind? Any city? No? I don't know. Huh? Amsterdam, yeah, that's a pretty dark place, right? But you just think, why would I go to a city that's just full of people? People are packed together. It's dirty. They're godless. In general, cities tend to be, a little more, we could say liberal or, anti-God. And we think, man, I don't want to go and live in a huge city. I mean, most people I talk to, they think, man, I want to go live somewhere where there's space, and I can raise my family, there's room for my kids, all these kind of things. No one's like, yeah, I want to go to the city and live, in this tiny apartment all crammed in. And, it's no one, I don't really hear many people saying that, but that's what God is saying to Jonah, go to this city. And, maybe that we can understand why, Jonah was a little resistant. The Syrians, we'll talk about it a little bit more. They were, famous for how cruel they were, and they had done many, many terrible things against the Israelites. So, of course, Jonah would feel, a resistance to go and to minister to a city that had, caused his own nation so many problems, and probably people that he knew, had suffered, amazing for them, suffered because of them. But one quick point. Jonah is kind of a unique book in the Old Testament in that it shows or reveals God's heart very, very clearly for all people, right? Many people have they have a hard time with the Old Testament because they read it and they think, oh, this is like so pro-Israel. I live in Jordan, and over half of the population of Jordan is Palestinian. So you can't really talk to them about Israel because of the bad blood there. And so many people, they say, oh, I share with Arabs and Muslims, and they say, oh, the Old Testament's been changed by the Jews, and that's why it says so many great things about the Jews and all that kind of stuff. To be honest, it doesn't really say that many nice things about it. It's actually puts them in a pretty bad light if you pay attention when you read. But many there in the Old Testament, we have so many little windows into God working among the nations. Now the main theme, right, or line that we follow through the Old Testament is, of course, about the nation Israel, okay? But throughout that, we have these scattered little windows that give us, shed light and reveal God's heart for the nations. If you remember Abraham, when he met this random king from Salem, remember Melchizedek? Totally out of the blue. He wasn't, Jewish. He was from this city, Salem, but he was a priest of the Most High God. He was a king of the city. So, somehow this city knew about the true God. And all of the people there had the truth of God, and they were worshiping the true God. You think of Caleb. Remember Joshua and Caleb? Caleb was a Gentile. He came from one of the tribes, the Kenizzites, who were tribes that were living in the land of Canaan before the Israelites came in. But he, along with many from his, clan or tribe or whatever you want to call it, they had started to worship the true God. You think of Uriah. Do you remember Uriah the Hittite that, David sent to die? Actually, he sent him to die. Ammon, the city we live in, is that city where he was sent to die. Remember, I forget the name of the general right now. Joab, I think. Anyways, he said, go, get close enough to the gate, that so these people die, and he was killed. But the Hittites were a hated enemy of Israel. But he was a worshiper of God, It's amazing. David's mighty men, many of David's mighty men were Gentiles. They weren't Israelites. But they were, God, and so we have all these little pictures of God's heart for the nations. My favorite, of course, is in the New Testament when we look in the book of Acts, and it gets there in chapters 8, 9, and 10. In chapter 8 of Acts, you remember the Ethiopian was saved, right? Riding in the chariot. And then in chapter 9, of course, who was saved? I was, Paul, right? No, it's okay. I wasn't around then. Paul got saved. And in chapter 10 is Cornelius, right? Cornelius was an Italian, a European. Paul was a Jew, right? And the Ethiopian was an African. All of those, you can trace them back to the three sons of who? Noah. You see? Right there in the New Testament, we have a picture right when the church is born and the gospel's going. These three people that are saved, they represent the whole population of the whole world. God's heart for all nations, for all people. It's amazing. And here we have God telling Jonah, go to Nineveh, probably one of the most godless, ruthless cities in the world at that time. Isn't that amazing? When's the last time you prayed and God, send somebody to the most godless and ruthless people in the world, the most godless and ruthless city? That's God's heart. That's God's heart. And so he calls Jonah to go there. It's interesting, Jonah, as we'll read, it's interesting that Jonah was a prophet of God. He walked with God. He heard from God, right? He prophesied. He was the mouthpiece of God. We're not going to read it, but if you look, when he was in the belly of the fish, almost the whole, his prayer, there in the belly of the fish, it's almost a complete, everything he says is almost all from the book of Psalms, from different Psalms. He knew the word of God very well, but he had completely missed God's heart. Isn't that amazing? Being used by God, a prophet of God, a mouthpiece of God, knowing the word of God, but he completely missed God's heart. That's kind of, that's scary for me, Because sometimes we think, well, I'm in the Bible, I'm reading the Word all the time, and God's using me, He's ministering through me, and it's kind of like, okay, it's like this fail-safe, But even in that place, we can miss God's heart. We can be not seeing, God's passion to reach all peoples. So the prophet, who was known for his fruitful ministry, he had lost touch with God's heart and God's mission for the world. He was a long way off from God's heartbeat for the lost, but no one, not even himself, not even the prophet himself, would have known that until God interrupted his life. Do you see that? He would have never known that he was missing God's heart for the lost unless God had said, "Arise, go to Nineveh." See, that's how easy it is for us to miss the depths and the weight and the immensity of God's grace. That's how easy. When we're kind of here in our comfort zone, we're loving the Lord, we're serving him, he's ministering through us, but often it's not until he steps in and he calls us to do something that we're uncomfortable with that we miss how great his grace is, and how passionate he is for the lost. So Jonah, he tries to run away, right? He goes down, he finds a ship. If you look at the map, he's there in Israel. He goes down to Joppa on the Mediterranean Sea, and he's already headed in the wrong way because Nineveh is over here in the east. He gets on a ship which is in the west. He goes to Tarshish, which is way out in the west. So he goes the complete opposite way. And it's interesting what it says. It says that what? He rose to flee from the presence of the Lord. I don't think Jonah honestly thought that he could get away from God's presence, right? What is it? Psalm 139, it says that, if I go to heaven, you're there. If I go to, hell, you're there. If I get on the wings of, what is it? Eagle? I forget. You're there. God's everywhere. We have God's omnipresence there. He knew the Psalms. He quotes from them. So I don't think Jonah thought that he could actually run away from God's presence, okay? But I do think that he thought he could avoid God's call somehow, the call to go to Nineveh. And so he thinks, well, I'll just get away. I can't stay here in Israel anymore because I've ignored God, I need to go somewhere else where nobody knows about me, and maybe I can, do something else there. I'm not going to be a prophet anymore. Maybe I'll just, do something else. And he goes. And he tries to get away from God's call. And he goes down, and what does he do? He sleeps. He just goes to sleep. Maybe he was depressed, I don't know. It's interesting, I think that sometimes when we resist God's call in our life, we can kind of maybe slip into this kind of depression or heaviness in our lives, And, I think oftentimes, not all the time, but, there's times where maybe we're kind of resisting God in our life, and he kind of allows this heaviness to set in, and we think, Lord, what's going on? But it's because we're not following in what God has called us to do. And you know what also happens is we become a little irrational, It's kind of like God kind of lets us go a little bit. We're all a little bit crazy. And it's kind of like he kind of takes his grace away a little bit, and he lets us kind of really go crazy. And he thinks, well, I just want to get away from God's call. Now, if he really sat down and thought about it, he knew that he couldn't do that, right? Just like I was saying, he knew that he couldn't get away from God's presence. But sometimes we think things that are untrue. Well, oftentimes we do that. And we think, well, Lord, I'm not going to do this because I'm not comfortable with it, but I'll just kind of do this, and life will be okay. And life isn't okay, And it's amazing, how there's so many things in our lives, so many problems and so many issues in our families and things that actually kind of can be traced back to just little, areas of disobedience in our life or resistance to God's call. And it manifests itself in different ways, kind of like a sickness, right? You have symptoms. And oftentimes we're always trying to treat the symptoms in our lives, and we totally miss that, there's something else. We're not being diagnosed properly. And I think, Jonah, we see that, he kind of becomes a little irrational because he refuses to listen to God's call. So he's there on the boat, right? And what happens in verse 4? It says, "The Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship, and lain down, was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, 'What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish.'" This is amazing to me. Jonah, who had been used by God, God had spoken through, goes down to the ship. He goes down into the depths of the ship, and he goes to sleep, and there's this storm going on. And what is he doing? He's sleeping. He's sleeping. And I think this is such a great picture of what so easily can happen in our lives, and how the church can just kind of fall asleep. Did you notice it says that the mariners, there's a storm. What are they doing? Each one is crying out to their God, So, maybe you have a guy over here, and, he's crying out to his God, and this guy over here, he believes in a different God. He's crying out to him. The other guy, maybe he doesn't believe in God, so he's just trying to believe in himself or something. And it's just chaos. And Jonah is sleeping. But he knows the true God. And I think that's such a really great illustration of the world today. Aren't people around us all crying out to their own gods? Right? I mean, you got, Muslims crying out to their God. You got, the Buddhists doing their thing. And you got, maybe the atheists that, we don't even believe in God. And, everybody has this, certain path that they've chosen. And, where am I? Where are we? Where's the church in the midst of this? Are we sleeping? And it's so funny. The captain comes down and he says, "What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise." And that is what is so, I think, dangerous, and so something that we need to be, on guard against is falling asleep in this world, even though there's a storm going on. I've had the privilege of living, in many different countries, and it's allowed me to have a little bit of a different perspective on life. Obviously there in the Middle East where we're at now, it's just a mess. I mean, there's no solution. That's how bad it is. It's just chaos. And, there's no answer except for Jesus. That's the only answer that's going to bring any kind of peace, or it's going to solve anything. You have the greatest nations in the world, the most powerful superpowers in the world, with unlimited resources, and they've tried to solve the problem over there. Iraq. It was first it was the British Empire, when they were the empire that ruled the world, the empire that the sun never set on. It was all over the world. They tried to solve the Iraq problem, and it was a mess when they left. So then America came in and tried to solve the problem, and it's worse than it's ever been. That's how bad it is, and it's only Jesus that's going to bring any kind of solution for the people there. But the thing is that we can actually still live our lives kind of sleeping and not realizing the actual storm that's going on. And don't you want to, you know what, I'll be honest, sometimes I want to sleep, not physically, that when I was, we have 5 kids, and when they were all little, that's all I wanted to do was sleep, because we never slept, right? It was like, they were all, I forget, my wife tells me, we had 5 kids in between 1 and 4 at one point. And, they were all little, and, they're all in diapers, or maybe it was 3. I don't know. I don't even remember because I didn't sleep for those years. But it was pretty bad. But here, sometimes, don't you want to forget about the problems in the world sometimes? Don't you? Don't you just want to like turn it off sometimes and be like, I just want to go down into my boat, into the inner, part where nobody can get to me and I'm not going to hear anything and I just want to sleep, I just want to disconnect from the world, from the problems, from the lost. Isn't that the kind of the easier path? I'll be honest, I feel like that sometimes. I just want to like not think about it. I don't want to know. I don't want to think about people going to hell. I just want to disconnect. And I think that, Jonah was kind of like that. He just wanted to go to sleep. He just wanted to turn it off, and he didn't want to be bothered. He didn't want to be pushed out of his comfort zone. He didn't want to be uncomfortable. God has called us, to minister into an area of the world that, we love being there. We love ministering, but, it is uncomfortable at times. There are things that I'm not comfortable with. God has called, people ask me sometimes, because I have a wife, she's blonde and blue eyes, and so that's like a big, she sticks out, pretty bad over there in our world, and all our kids, except for one, are blonde, and, she gets harassed all the time by the men over there, and there's a lot of, security concerns and all these kinds of things, and, as a person, right, just naturally, there are things that I'm very, very uncomfortable with, Sometimes, when I go and I meet with some of these guys and we sit down and, I start sharing with them, I get very uncomfortable because I realize who they are and where they are from and what they've done, and, if we weren't here, if we were in their country, they would kill me right now, there are, uncomfortable things that God calls us to do. And maybe it's not, to that extreme, but maybe it's, reaching out to that person that, you feel like they're threatening your way of life, Think about the Assyrians. They were threatening Israel's way of life, their freedoms that they had enjoyed. They were going to come in and they were going to bring foreign gods, and, they were going to come and, relocate, people back to Assyria, and, they were just going to bring devastation. And so, is God's calling me to go maybe minister to that person that I feel like they're destroying, my country. They're destroying the morals of my country. They're, they're promoting a lifestyle that, I think is going to just destroy, but you see what I'm saying? Like, it's uncomfortable at times. And that's what we see, here with Jonah. The point is, that we see very clearly that God's heart of love and mercy and grace cannot be unconcerned with the lost, no matter how bad they are, or for us, the inconveniences or the amount of maybe things that I'm not comfortable with, what they present, the love and mercy and grace will always, overlook those things and overcome those things. So let's jump ahead a little bit, and we're going to look here at the end of chapter 3. So we kind of skip over Jonah in the belly of the fish there. And at the end, so, Jonah, I'm sure you know the story. He's there and he gets spit back out on dry land, and then the Lord tells him to go for the second time to Nineveh. And so he goes. And it says a little bit about Nineveh. It was big, 3-day journey. They estimate there was probably about 1 million people living in the city at the time. And he says, yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown, in verse 4. And the people of Nineveh believed God. They called for a fast, put on sackcloth from the greatest to the least, And the king puts on sackcloth. He even says, we're not going to eat or anything. We're not going to feed our animals. It's like amazing. And it says there in verse 10, it says, when God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them, and he didn't do it. God was so willing to show mercy. A city that was so wicked, so, evil. But God was, as soon as they showed any sign, right, of turning, of, repentance, of believing in God, he was right there. And he said, okay, I'm not going to destroy you. I'm going to show you mercy. And you have to understand, because here, let's go ahead and read these verses. We need to understand how ridiculous and how scandalous and how crazy that is, that God would show mercy to these people. So we kind of understand that by Jonah's reaction. It says, but it displeased Jonah exceedingly. He was really mad, right? It's literally, he was like hot. He was like, like the temperature was rising, and he was angry. He was really mad. And he prayed to the Lord and said, Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it's better for me to die than to live. And the Lord said, do you do well to be angry? So Jonah's mad. He said, I knew that this was going to happen. And this is why I didn't want to come in the first place. I knew you, God. I know you. I know that you're too loving. I know that you're too gracious and you're too merciful. I know you too well. And that's why I didn't want to come here, because I knew that if I came here and these people turned to you, that you would show them mercy. And I don't want them to have mercy. I don't want them to experience, the forgiveness of all the terrible things that they've done. And he gets mad. And he says, just kill me. It's better. Because I don't want to go back to Israel and be the one that says, well, our great enemy, remember all the wicked, terrible things that they did? Well, God, he's forgiven them, and he's shown them mercy. And I was the one, that, God used to do that. He saw that as, so, we look at that and we think, wow, that's so great. Why? Because we understand that it shows God's, mercy, and his grace. But we have to understand, from a human standpoint, it's wrong. It's wrong. It's a scandal that these people would be given mercy. It's not right. The Assyrians were renowned for their cruelty and their wickedness. When they would go and attack, a city, and they would take the city, of course, they would rape all the women. They would take the pregnant women. They would rip open their stomachs, pull the babies out, dash them on rocks. They would take the men and they would skin them alive, and they would hang the skin of these men all over the walls of the city. The kings of the Assyrians, they felt that it was their duty to be as cruel as they could. And they would record their cruel deeds, the things that they thought up, and they would leave that kind of as like a memorial. And the king after them, they felt that it was their job to try and be more cruel than the king before them. And that was their legacy. They would take wooden stakes, and they would lubricate them, and they would, stick them up people's, the anus of people, and they would just leave them there. And they would survive for they could survive up to 17 days like that. And they would feed them, so that they would survive. They would put people in these like baths, and they would tie them down, and they would just feed them. And as the person was in there and they were, going to the bathroom and all this stuff, the flies would come and the maggots would come, and they would decay alive. And they would survive up to a month like that. And they would decay in their own refuse and stuff. This is the kind of things that these people did. So you think, man, someone like that, you think that's not even a human. Those are animals. And they just need to be put down, right? That's a cancer that we need to cut out and destroy. So you can understand why Jonah is maybe a little upset, right? God, that's not right. That's crazy. That's insane. How can you show mercy and grace and love to a people like that? You and I would remember what I said? When I read more about Jonah and think about it more, the more I realize that I'm like Jonah. In those same circumstances, actually, to be honest, in lesser circumstances, or maybe not as extreme as this, we're just like Jonah. And we decide, we begin to determine who's deserving of God's mercy and who's not, you know. And they're hard things to think about because it pushes us out of our comfort zone to think about, how do I really think about people? You know, every one of us here is prejudiced. Every one of us. Maybe you think, I love all people. I don't hate anybody. Well, you haven't met everybody. There's somebody out there that you hate, you know. Often, we don't feel maybe a certain prejudice or even a hatred towards people because we remove ourselves from people. It's easy to say, oh, I love everybody when I don't know you, right? Oh, yeah, we're friends. Yeah, we shook hands. He seems like a nice guy. But guess what? The more you get to know people, you just think, man, that's why marriage is so hard, right? Yeah? The more you see, man, this person's a sinner. You know, and the friction just becomes greater and greater, and without God's grace, it doesn't work. But you see what I'm saying? Like, the more we're with people, the more we see people, the more we're around people, and the more kinds of people, guess what? As a human, just a natural human, you will become prejudiced, and you will become hateful. And that's why the world is the way it is. That's why there's so much hatred. That's why there's so much prejudice. That's why there's, all these crazy things. Because that's the kind of people we are. And we don't deserve, in human terms, in just terms, we don't deserve mercy. We don't deserve grace, We don't deserve. It's like Paul said, maybe someone would die for a good person, But what did God do? He died for us when we were still sinners, when we weren't. Nobody does that. The funny story, when we lived in Kyrgyzstan, there was this neighbor. Kyrgyzstan used to be a part of the Soviet Union, right? Maybe for some younger people that don't know about that, but this, it was the USSR it was called, and they were very, there was this thing called the Cold War, where America and, the USSR, they just kind of hated each other, and they were always afraid that someone was going to shoot a nuke at the other, and, there was this hatred. So when we moved to Kyrgyzstan, kind of the older generation, they still remembered that. And so my neighbor, he used to be in the military, and so he didn't like Americans, and every time I'd see him, he would say, I want to punch your face. That's what his greeting was every morning. Not every morning, because I didn't see him every morning, but he hated me, He didn't even know me. But, it was difficult for me to love that person, You know what I mean? The other neighbors who are nice and welcoming and, they bring you cookies and all that stuff. Of course. Oh, yeah, it's great. But those people that are mean, right? And that don't treat you nice and those things, those are the people that we think, well, they don't deserve God's mercy, and they don't deserve my time. They don't deserve my energy. They don't deserve me taking time to show God's love to them. Well, I've just put myself in God's place and decided who gets mercy and who doesn't. I'm glad no one did that for me. I'm glad God didn't let someone determine, does Paul get mercy or not? No, because I wasn't deserving. So, sometimes we put ourselves in those kinds of places. The bottom line as we get to the end of the story here is that we care more about, our comfort and our convenience, and we care about the dumb things in life more than people, than the lost. What happens at the end of the story, remember? Jonah gets mad, he says, kill me, and then he goes up. Remember I was talking about the side of the hill there? Looks into the plains. He goes up on the side there. He sits down, and then, God sends that plant. Remember, it grows up, and it gives him some shade. It gets hot over there, It gets very, very hot over there in Iraq. And the sun, and he's got some shade, and he's happy about it, And then the worm comes, remember, and it destroys it, and he gets mad about that. Jonah was more concerned about that plant than he was about that city of 1 million people. And again, you just think, Jonah, what is the matter with you? And then I realize, I should be saying, Paul, what's the matter with you, Because I get concerned more about the plant that gives me shade in life so that I'm comfortable than I do about the millions that are lost. And they're not that far away from me. And they're not even as bad as the Assyrians were. Isn't that crazy? It's amazing, and I just think, Lord, I want the truth of your gospel and the mercy and the grace and the love that you've shown me to always be affecting my life, so that I can always offer that, to those around me, no matter the inconvenience or no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Think about this. Jonah was pretty honest to actually record this, right? The story just kind of ends, and you wish there was one more chapter, don't you? Or at least I do. Because it just ends, right? And wait, like what happened? Jonah, did you come around, or what happened? We don't know. But the fact that he wrote this down, I think kind of, proves that maybe he understood kind of how hard his heart was, because he recorded this story. And it's very honest. It's a very honest account of how much of a failure Jonah was and how great and awesome, and loving and gracious and merciful God is, which is really the point of the Bible, as you read through it. Prophet after prophet, leader after leader, they just fall. And you see their failures and their sin and their imperfections. And it's because it's leading up to Jesus, right? Who's the point of the whole thing. There's a great, contrast between Jonah and, God in the story. Jonah was not willing to go. He wasn't. He didn't care about the city, about the people. He was more concerned about himself. God was willing to go. He came down, and he was more concerned. He humbled himself. He put aside, his authority and position as God, and he left the conveniences, if you want to say, of heaven and the comfort of heaven, and he came down and became a man. Do you understand? For many of us, we don't understand how crazy that is to say that God became a man. One of the biggest problems that Muslims have with our faith is what? Is that we say God became a man, right? And if you really think about it, it is pretty crazy, And it's like, unless God had said that in his word, then it's blasphemy. That God would become a man? Are you crazy? God, how can... God is holy, God is just, God is perfect, he's God. And he became a man, and what are you talking about? He humbled himself, and he ate, and he drank, and he went to the bathroom, and he suffered, and that's wrong. You can't say that God became a man. What's the matter with you? We've become used to this idea, and we've lost the absurdity that should be, that God would become a man. But he did, because of the mercy that he wanted to show to people, and the grace that he wanted to pour out, and the love that he wanted to reveal to them. And we need the gospel, right? Don't fall into that place where you're always thinking that they need the gospel. If you do that, then you will come across as a self-righteous, snob, Christian, Bible thumper, or whatever, which a lot of the world thinks Christians are. They're just these self-righteous people that think they're better than us, And often it's because we come across that way, because we think, oh, you need the gospel, God has called us to be missionaries, to go to a different country and bring the gospel, and sometimes we can think, oh, they need the gospel. But when I remember, we need the gospel, I need the gospel just as much as you do. Yeah, I've believed in Jesus, he's saved me, but I need the gospel every day just as much as the lost, And that's what allows me to, bridge that gap and realize and not fall into the Jonah syndrome. But, realize that I need the gospel. I'm not better than the Assyrians. We think, well, I'm not that bad. Well, yeah, you are. You are. That's the takeaway for tonight, Take home and say, I'm as bad as the Assyrians. No, I'm just joking. But really, that's the depth of our wickedness. But God has shown me mercy. He's given me grace. He's shown me his love. He's given me a son. He became a man so that I could be saved. That's ridiculous. That's crazy. That's not right. But he did it. He did it to prove his love, It's like there's this story of, the boy and the girl, the boyfriend and girlfriend. The boy says, oh, I love you, and they're standing there, on like the edge of a cliff, and they're just kind of enjoying the view, looking out, and he says, you know what, I'm gonna prove that I love you, and he jumps off the cliff, and as he's falling down, he says, see, I'm proving that I love you, and then, well, that's kind of dumb. That doesn't prove anything. He's just an idiot, It's like, sometimes we forget, when we think of Jesus' sacrifice, that it's the proof of his love because we needed the sacrifice. Not just because he wanted to do something, to show his love, but we have to understand why we needed that, that demonstration or that proof of his love. And when we start to, grab a hold of that, for many of you, right, as you've grown as a believer, hasn't, the depths of your sin and your wickedness allowed you to understand and see how great God's love is and his grace and mercy? It's kind of this weird thing. You think, oh, I'm growing as a believer, I should, be maybe feeling like I'm less of a sinner or something. But it's not. It's the exact opposite. Like Paul, his early letters there, in Corinthians, he says, oh, I'm the least of the apostles, right? And then there in Ephesians, a little bit later, several years later, he says, well, I'm the least of the saints. And then one of his last letters to Timothy, he says, what? I'm the biggest sinner there is. He just he gets worse and worse and worse. And that's how it is for you and I. As we see more and more the depths of our sin and the depravity and the wickedness of our heart, it should actually magnify the grace of God and his love and mercy. And it should motivate our hearts to reach the lost, because that's God's heart. There's a lot of things, here in the book of Jonah, but, those are some of the things that, I've been kind of thinking about as you think about the world and just, we're seeing wickedness and just sin increase, right, at a rate that we've never seen. I think of the world that my kids are going to be, that they are growing up in, and how radically different just one generation is from the world that I grew up in. I just think, Lord, help them. Like, it's crazy, the stuff that goes on, But what does that do? What does that do? Does it want to make us just pull away and go hide in a boat somewhere and fall asleep and try to disconnect and get away. One of my cousins, we were just talking, and he was telling me about this new kind of like book that was out, and it's about, it's kind of like, it was interesting because it's almost like it's the whole idea that was there in the Middle Ages of like going and building monasteries and getting away from like the sin of the world and being apart, so that we can be holy or whatever. And I guess it's this like new, I don't know how big it is, but it's kind of this new movement of people thinking we just need to leave, get away, and so that we can not be part of this crazy mess, That's not what God has called us to do. Or we think, oh, Lord, I'm just going to hold on and I hope you come back, I hope the Lord comes back too. But there's a definite unhealthy side to that when you think, I don't want to be a part of this, Lord, just come back. That's not God's heart. If God sent Jonah to the Ninevites, to the Assyrians, we might still have a ways to go, So, yeah. There's the amount of the lost is increasing, right? But I think that as you and I are being pushed out of our comfort zones, because now, we're not even trying to step out of our comfort zone, but the world is kind of encroaching on us. So you know what I want to say? You can't even, it kind of feels like it's overtaking you at times. What is our, response going to be? Hopefully, it causes us to realize more God's grace and his mercy for the lost. Hopefully, and as we get pushed out of our maybe comfort zones and we realize the conveniences and the comforts that we hold on to, and we allow those to kind of outweigh the needs of the lost and the fact that they need salvation, hopefully we can kind of regain more and more every day God's heart, for the lost world. I hope that's my prayer, and it's a daily thing, there's no, we need it because the world will make you hard. Life is hard, right? The world is hard, and unless we're always receiving from God's grace, right, and understanding his mercy in our own life, then we won't care about the lost. We won't. And we'll feel justified, just like Jonah felt justified not to care about them. So, yeah, just a few lessons, I guess, from Jonah. Let's pray. Father God, we are humbled. We are in awe of your mercy and your grace and your love. We do not deserve your mercy. But Lord, that's your heart. You are love. And that's your passion to bring us back to yourself, Lord, and that we might know you, that we might be saved from our sin. And we're so grateful. We're so humbled. We're so humbled that you would leave heaven and that you would become a man. It's ridiculous. It's insane. It's crazy. But you did it. And we're humbled by that. I pray that all of us here, would grow deeper and deeper in our understanding of the gospel. That every day we would be overwhelmed by your mercy and your grace, Lord. And God, may we not be like Jonah. We thank you for the example of Jonah, Lord, and may we not run away. May we not disconnect. May we not cherish comforts and conveniences in this world more than the lost, than your creations, Lord. Every creature, you said to take the gospel to every creature, each person. So Lord, use us, fill us with your Spirit. We can't do it. We don't have the love. We don't have the grace that we need. It comes from you. So wherever you've called us, God, if it's Jordan, if it's here, Lord, Sacramento, if it's downtown San Francisco, if it's wherever, Lord, may we bring your mercy. May we bring the truth of Jesus, and may we be ready, Lord, and willing to spend our energy, to spend our lives so that others might know you. So just bless the church here, Lord. Thank you for the opportunity to be with them. May you just continue to shine, Lord, through them in this community. And Lord, until you return, may we be about your business. May we be those who are just channels of your love and mercy. People that just are always going deeper and understanding your gospel and offering that gospel to this world. So we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.